Cutting holes in hard surface models in Blender, especially on curved surfaces like this, can be tricky. But don't worry, I got you covered with 3 simple workflows to master this skill. What's going on, you 3D modeling beasts? This is Mussi. I'm a professional 3D artist with well over a decade of experience. Today, I'll show you how to achieve pro-level results using beginner-friendly techniques that will level up your workflow and ensure clean topology. Before we get started, make sure to download your free copy of the Hard Surface Cheat Sheets. I put my decades worth of professional experience into creating this guide that will kickstart your hard surface modeling. Download it using the pinned comment down below. Let's get started. The first method is what I call the circle and project. For that, we're going to start with a simple cylinder here. So I'll do Shift A, and then I will create a cylinder. This is going to be 24 sides to the cylinder, and I want to make this quite a bit longer. So here on the scale, on the Z, I'll input a 2. Now that this is elongated, I need to apply these transforms. If not, things like the bevels are going to be out of whack. So I'll do Control A, I'll apply all these transforms. These are all set to 1, and we're ready to go. Now, before we dive into the actual modeling on how we're going to inset these holes here, I want to give a little bit of context on working with cylinders. Usually with cylinders, details dictate density. So the more details we're going to carve into this, the more subdivisions this should have. Now, this is going to be a simpler cutout, so we really don't need to go too dense on the cylinder, but we have to respect the cylinder. What does that mean? Well, let's dive here into edit mode, and I can further explain. This is going to be done via bevels. So I'll just do a bevel here and add 2 divisions with a shape of 1. It's going to give us this nice crisp holding edges on either side. And then I'll do a loop cut, drop that right in the middle, and we are ready to subdivide this. So on object mode, I'll do Control 2. I'll right click, shade smooth. Now we have this pretty nice surface. Dealing with cylinders, there's rules to the game, and it's good to understand which direction is okay to add subdivisions to a cylinder and which areas we should avoid touching to alter its shape. So if we were to add some loop cuts parallel to the cylinder, you see there's really no consequence here. We still get some good smooth shading. The problem comes when adding loop cuts perpendicular to the shape. And a lot of times in the modeling process, we're going to add more loops if that initial level of density on that cylinder is not properly set from the beginning. And this could lead us into trouble as we add more edge loops here perpendicularly and we go back into object mode, especially with a shiny material, we see that we get this nasty pinching. The other rule to working with cylinders is that you really want to try to avoid shifting these edges really in any major direction, right? So if we tap G twice, we go to edge slide, and we start offsetting these edges, we're going to notice that if we go to top view and we look at that sub D modifier, this is also causing lumpiness as well. This is why it's beneficial to understand the initial levels of density and set those, especially with a cylindrical surface. So this is going to come into play later on, but I did want to set the basis of this, especially when doing sub D modeling with this middle edge loop. And I want to go ahead and actually get 2 more edge loops here. Now we could add it with a loop cut here and a loop cut here on the other side as well. But a better way is just selecting this edge, beveling it, and we're trying to isolate the area where this inset's gonna go. So once this is set and this looks about right, what I can do is add another loop cut here and another loop cut here. And what these added loop cuts are gonna do, if I go to scale here, scale this on the Z, these are just gonna add a little bit of a buffer and they're gonna help reinforce this bevel here and this holding it. So now that our base shape is actually set, what I'm gonna do is actually duplicate this because we're gonna use this for another example in a second, but I'm gonna hide this for the time being. Now that we have our base shape, we need to have our cutout, and for that, we're gonna use a circle. So I'm going to do Shift A. I'll add a circle here. I'm going to leave this at 12. I'll hit R, X, 90, and you see this is flipped. And then I'm going to simply scale this down. And then I'm also going to offset it in the Y here. So I'll hit G, Y, move this out of the way. And now if we go back to the front view and back to solid, and I enable my wireframe here, we're going to take a look at somewhat of a preview of how our topology is going to look like. Now, one of the things that I mentioned early, when you're placing this cylinder, you want to go ahead and stay away from having a very tight proximity to this holding edge right here. I'm going to disable my sub D modifier, but if we look at this holding edge, if we were to place our circle here, we're going to get some pinching, as I mentioned earlier, because the proximity of these two edges in comparison to this edge here, that's going to be too close and that's going to reinforce, and you're going to get some noticeable pinching with this scaling. So what you ultimately want to do is actually have a little bit of a breathing room and somewhat of a compromise when you're placing these cylindrical cutouts. So I think somewhere like this is going to work. The other thing that you want to be mindful of is having your edges actually match. So I'm going to make this very simple. I'm going to select this top half. This is going to be 6 edges. And here in my cylinder, again, if we look here, this is 6, right? So obviously this is even, so this is 12, and this is going to be 12. This is going to help us to quickly bridge all these edges once this is nice and set. So from this point, obviously in front, this looked good, but now this doesn't in perspective. So we need to project these points onto this cylindrical surface. For that, we're going to add a shrink wrap modifier. So I'll go ahead and go to shrink wrap, and we need to select a target. So I selected this target. Now there's a couple options here by default. If we go back to the front, you see that this doesn't look proper. Now, one of the things that we do want to check anytime that we're dealing with directions is, again, the rotations on these objects and the scales. So I'm going to do Control A. And before I do that, let's see this here. But you see that this has a rotation value. So our life is going to be a lot easier if we actually apply these transforms. So I'll do Control A, all transforms. Now we're good to go. And same thing that we did on this cylinder. It's going to avoid issues when we apply this shrink wrap. So now this shrink wrap, if we go back to it and we look at project, now the right axis is going to come into play. So when you have rotations that are not applied, these axes are not going to be in line with these modifiers, and it could cause a lot of confusion, a lot of pain and agony. So now that we are projecting onto the Y, we'll simply select the Y, and there we go. Now this works properly because we apply those transforms. So this looks good to go. Now from here, what I'll do is I want to go ahead and apply this. So I'll apply that shrink wrap modifier. Now this shape is baked in. Now I can dive in here, and before I make this messier, I'll basically go into face mode. I'll select these faces here, or basically where that cutout's going to be, and I'll delete those faces, and this is starting to shape up. Now, what we also need to do is select both of these objects. I'll do Control J. This is going to join our objects because these actually need to be one object. So now we have 12 edges here and we have 12 edges here, and this is going to make our life a lot easier. So with both of these edge loops selected, I'll right click and I'll go ahead and go to Bridge Edge Loops, and now these are bridged. Okay. Now this is our cylindrical cutout. From this point, we could simply go in here, select this edge loop. I'll extrude this out on the Y here, and then I can right click. I'm going to hit Q because I have grid fill as a quick favorite. This is not right, so we can play with the offset here and the span until we get something that's desirable. Now from this point, we need to add some holding edges. I'll bevel these like so. Apply a sub D modifier, turn off the wireframe, and this looks pretty good. And the reason I chose this very specular material is because this material makes your curved surfaces, any pinching that you have, it's going to be very evident. Even though it's not my favorite material to work with, I do like the matte caps for things like that. And then usually I'll work with this, and maybe from time to time I will switch it to something with a little bit more specularity. But that's just why I was using that red material. And for these matte caps, I do like to go in here and turn on the cavity. This gives it a nice little pop. Pretty happy with this result. What I would do to finish this off is go in here, delete these faces, and simply just grid fill this. Here's a bonus method that you can use to get a similar result. I'm going to select these faces back here. I'll simply inset them. You want to make sure you have the loop tools enabled. So if we go to loop here and loop tools under mesh here. As long as this add-on is enabled, you'll be able to right click, loop tools, and do circle. Now I have the right settings. If for some reason this is set on flatten, this is not going to bend or project properly. So I'm going to disable this, and then we can play with the radius. And if you do find that you have a little bit of pinching here, what you can do is actually edge slide these vertices here, and this might alleviate some of that. Now obviously you do want to not move those too much, but that is a method that you could use to, if you do notice a little bit of pinching here when you're creating these shapes. The next method that I want to share is the Booleans and clean. This method works well when you want to insert another cutout, but at an angle. So while this was a cutout that was perfectly perpendicular to our shape, if we wanted to create a shape or a cutout with an angle, we would probably benefit from using an existing shape and Boolean those differences out. So for this, we're going to need another cylinder here. I'm going to vert snap my cursor here to this vert, and the reason for that is I want to create my cutout shape from this point right here. I'll create this in object mode. I'll do Shift A, mesh. So we'll actually use the same numbers we used before. So I'm going to hit 12. And then we'll simply rotate this 45 degrees. We'll scale it down. To eyeball this, since these are separate objects, again, I'm going to enable my wireframe, scale this down. And this looks a little bit too steep of an angle. So what I'll do is I'll kind of manually finagle this. Since we're kind of matching up these two shapes, I want to make sure these actually align. So this is aligned here. But once we actually Boolean this together, it's going to be a little bit messier. So what I want to do is actually line up this geometry before we do the Booleans operation. So I'm going to move this up. And now I want to make sure that I'm visualizing this before the Booleans, how this is going to join, right? So these verts are going to join here. These verts are going to join here. And we could do a simple inset. And again, we're going to use these same 12 edges that we've used before. So if we select these edges again, this is 12 and this is a 12-sided cylinder. So this is going to work out fine when we go to bridge. So now that we have both of our shapes, I want to go ahead and subtract this from this. And for that, we'll need a Booleans modifier. I'll go to modifiers, Booleans, and I will select this object here. I'll take off the subdivision, make sure that it's moved to the bottom here. I'll go to wireframe and want to make sure that this is looking proper. So let's go to difference. Let's disable the sub D modifier for the time being. And this looks to be correct. So now I can just take this base cylinder, I can hide it, and I can see my result. So this looks good. So now we'll just simply need to apply the Boolean modifier. Now the changes are baked in, and now it's a matter of cleaning this up, right? And now we have pretty much this shape that if we look from the side or the front here, this is actually not a perfect circle. So we couldn't have done that same method and try to like push it at an angle. It wouldn't have worked, right? So this actually is a perfect cutout, but at an angle. So if you need an angle, you will use this Boolean and clean workflow. And here goes the clean part. So what we'll do is we already have this edge that's pretty much set in stone. So here what I'll do is I'll hit W, and this is going to enable me to paint these faces. It's a little bit quicker. And if you overpaint, you can do Control to deselect. I'll hit X. We'll delete the faces. I'll toggle my marquee again. And then we'll select basically this edge loop. And anytime that you're not able to select a edge loop like this, like we are here, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be an issue with the vertices. So I'm going to make sure that all my verts are merged, or I don't have any hanging verts, right? So here, this is the reason if something looks like a perfect edge loop, but you can't select the edge loop, there's something going on with the topology. And in this case, it's these little hanging verts. So we're going to go ahead and just select these here, and we can hit X, and we can dissolve vertices, and now these are gone. All right. And from this point, now we should be able to select our edge loop here. Let's see if these are, yep. So there's another one here, and there's another one here. We could also merge by distance or just simply merge, but I like this because I'm going to know exactly these are the ones that we want to keep. So I'll delete these verts as well. And now we can select the edge loop. So now we have a clean edge loop here, clean edge loop here. Right click, we'll go to bridge edge loops. And if you pay close attention, we have a very similar pattern to what we previously had. And now we'll simply bevel these bad boys together. I'll delete this face, and then we can go to grid fill. So that's pretty much the pattern I want. And I'll do another grid fill here just to quad this out, make it nice and pretty. If we view our sub D modifier and we enable again this red material, you see this actually looks pretty good. And if we hide the wireframe, we're getting pretty good results here. And now this cutout is set to an angle. So we're going to basically delete our old cutout Boolean, and then we'll name this Booleans and clean. And so far we have this at an angle, and here's the original one that we created. For the last example, I'm going to create a repeatable pattern. Sometimes we have to create a cylindrical cutout that spreads across a pattern, and doing this one by one is either tedious or almost impossible. There's a better workflow of creating a repeatable pattern of just one cutout, modeling it flat, and then bending it into place with the help of a simple deform and also an array modifier. What I want to do is make sure that this cursor is right in the middle of my origin. And for that, we could do Shift S and do cursor to world origin. And now we could do Shift A. For this, we're going to start with a grid. I think a 10 by 10 works pretty good. So we'll simply dive in. We'll select basically these edges here. I'll go ahead and drag marquee my area that I basically want to be a cutout. And for this, we are going to use the loop tools as this is flat. This is going to give us a consistent result. So I'll right click loop tools. We'll go to circle. And for this, we want to make sure we have flatten on, which it's a flat surface, so shouldn't really matter. And now we want to play with the radius here. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, remember, this is actually going to be bent, and the direction that we want to bend this, right? So if we want to bend it this way, we want to be mindful of this stretching, right? So it's probably a radius that it doesn't stretch this too much, because if we start getting this extreme stretching on a bent surface, meaning these edges here on this extreme angle, that might cause, right, a disruption to that perfect cylindrical spacing that we ultimately want on a curved surface. So I'm going to opt to do something that works with this shape. And I think this looks pretty good. So from this point, now that we have our initial pattern, we could inset this and we get this reinforcing loop. And this looks pretty good. And now our pattern is pretty much set up. And then from this point, I can simply delete this. And now we have a nice base for a repeatable pattern. These edges are nice and evenly spaced out, so we're not going to have any issues once this is being bent. The first order of business is to add a array modifier. So I'm going to do this in object mode. Array. There we go. Hip, hip, array. Terrible joke, but the results are nice. So we could go ahead and put pretty much what the pattern or how long we want this to be. I'm going to go with something like 16. Make sure that I like to work with even numbers when possible when doing these patterns, just as a rule of thumb. I want to create an offset. So this is the first leg of my pattern. So what I'll need is to actually apply this modifier. And now I can go in here. I can do Shift D. So I want to move this 2 in the Y, and this should snap properly since we're using perfect grid units here. I just use that. And now we're going to be able to create a little bit of a offset pattern. So I'll hit G. We'll start kind of moving this. I want to snap that right about here. So since we're using even numbers, 1 should work perfectly. So now we have this nice offset pattern that we could essentially merge. What I'll need to do is actually borrow one of these pieces. So I'll take this, I'll simply select these edges here. With this edge loop selected, I'm going to hit V to rip this edge, right? And what ripping is just separating these components. So now what I can do, since this is a separate polygon island, I can select one face, I can hit L, right? And then we can simply just move this guy over here. Okay. Now, one of the things that we'll probably need to do is snap this. So now with this shifted over here, I'm going to deselect everything and I'm going to select one vert here, hit L, and this is going to select link. But since this vert is the active element and we look at our snap options and we make sure that we're working with the active element, which is this vert, and then we are working with vertex, it's going to allow us to snap here. If I enable snapping, now we're able to snap these corners together. Okay. The last order of business is to actually merge these verts together. Even though this is snapped into place, you see that it's actually off, but we're not going to worry about that. These verts are going to get merged. One thing that I do want to fix though is I actually want to take a row from each side. So I'm going to go to face mode here, marquee all these, delete them. I'll repeat the same thing here. Delete these, and then I'll repeat the process here at the bottom. So I'll go here and I'll need to snap these together now that this pattern has changed. I'll select this vert, I'll hit A to select all my verts, and snapping still enabled. So we'll go ahead and just move this and we're nice and snapped, and this looks quite a bit better. I like the feel of this pattern. Now we can select both of these, hit Control J, go into vert mode here, and then select all, and then I'll hit M, do by distance, object mode, sub D, modifier, and this looks pretty good. So now we have pretty much one pattern here. We want to go ahead and kind of create this final repeatable pattern. So these were pretty much two legs of one pattern. Now we need to reapply another array, and this way we need to go up with this. Okay. For this, we'll switch the direction. We want to make sure that the array is on top. This is going to go on the Y, and we're simply just going to augment our pattern here. And anytime that you start creating these larger patterns, especially in sub D mode, if your computer starts to slow down a little bit, you could always disable this or just make sure this is cranked to a lower number. This is going to bend properly. The last order of business is to apply this array, make sure that our transforms are applied. And we actually don't have any transforms here. So this actually might work out okay. Let's go ahead and give it a simple deform. Make sure bend is set. And right now, this is bending this way. Sometimes I found this modifier to be a little finicky, all right? So the best way that I found to work with it is just find the axes that works. Because again, we don't have any, rotation information here on this grid. Go back here and we see that this is the axes that it's working. So now we're just going to simply rotate the object to kind of match this axis here. So I'm going to disable this, and then we're going to simply hit R, X, 90. So the problem here, even though we rotated this properly, is that now we have this transform. So as soon as we apply that transform modifier, is working properly, right? And now we're getting the bend in the direction we want. So if you wanted this to be a little bit thinner, we actually need to cut away a little bit of the pattern. That's not a problem since we're working non-destructive here. So I think what I want to do is I'm going to snatch this from the side, and we're just going to dive into face mode, and we're just going to kind of gut this out right about here. Faces, we just want to make sure that we have kind of that repeatable pattern and we don't lose that, or we're going to run into problems. So I think this looks good here. It's matching up. Now we can delete these faces and we can re-enable the bend, and this feels a lot better. In my opinion, I like the overall dimensions. So let's go ahead and drop this here first. We'll apply this. We're going to do a solidify, and then we can play with the thickness here. Now it looks like I forgot to merge some verts here. It's not a problem. This is non-destructive. So what we can do is just disable all this, simply just merge these verts. And now the solidify should look a little bit better, which it does. And so does our sub D modifier. To finish this off, we'll apply our solidify, and then we can go in here, bevel these edges, disable the wireframe, and there's our finished pattern. And if we wanted to get rid of some of this faceting, we could shade that smooth, and I think that looks pretty good. Pattern complete, and we stuck to our game plan. We made sure that this pattern, the reason it is working is because our topology supports that, right? And if we go back here, we look at the wireframe, This is nice and spaced out, so even when bent into place, it works out flawlessly. And that wraps up today's tutorial. If you enjoyed this and want me to continue to make more videos just like this, let me know by subscribing to the channel. Do you have any hard surface tips for quickly cutting out holes in hard surface models in Blender? If so, let me know in the comment section down below. You just learned 3 professional techniques for cutting holes in any hard surface model in Blender. While this is a great specific skill to have, there are still many other common hard surface shapes that trip up many 3D artists. I took my decades worth of experience and created these 5 hard surface modeling tips that will change how you 3D model in Blender. You could check them out in the video right here.